Hello, dear listener. This is the State of White Supremacy, July 28th, 2020. I haven't recorded a video for a couple of months. It's been a hard couple of months for us as a people. I haven't had really many new things to say. Just trying to make it. Been still on lockdown at home, working from home whenever there's a project available. I just got a new project this week, and although my ideas for this post primarily are things that have been on my mind for the past couple of months, what I want to begin with is what's been on my mind, particularly the past couple of days as I've started this new project. As I said in my previous post, that my job currently is editing or redacting legal documents, primarily documents regarding the Chicago police. And usually I'm redacting like documents, physical documents that I have to read. Whereas this week, the project I'm currently working on, I'm redacting audio files of testimonies of people talking about the Chicago police, their encounters with the police. So I'm having to listen to people give detailed testimonies in dealing with the police. I have to listen to one horror story after another, and it is much harder to listen than to read about this stuff, in documents, And one of the stories, the most vivid one that I listened to, was about a woman saying that she was a black female was assaulted by a black female cop in the police station. That she was talking to the black female cop. Well, she asked to use the phone. The black female cop let her use the phone, then cut off the phone in the middle of her conversation, and she responded angrily towards the black female cop, called her a bitch, and then the black female cop flipped out and physically assaulted her while white cops sat back watching. Black squabbling while white people sat back watching. And just imagine that image of a black female cop brutalizing a black woman. It's the kind of image you don't hear about in the news very much. But let's say there's lots of stuff that just don't hear about in the news, that people don't talk about. That's a scenario that you don't see, that just law enforcement culture in general, but just the idea of squabbling black people, overly emotional, volatile, squabbling black people, and how white people count on us being like that while they sit back and laugh. I mean, the majority of the stuff that I listened to were, the cliche, one case after another about black men being assaulted by racist cops that, for no reason other than just looking at them wrong, being assaulted, being made to strip or being physically assaulted, arms broken, faces being smashed in, brutalized in every way you can imagine. But I already know that this is cop culture under white supremacy. I already reached my conclusions about law enforcement under white supremacy. That's why, I hardly follow the news anymore, because it bores me, because I already know. The main thing that disturbed me about listening to these testimonies is it gives you real insight into ghetto life. I find it incredibly difficult to listen to what I call ghettoized black people who come across so uneducated, so childish, so just molded into what white supremacy needs us to be in that box that we call ghettos. And again, stories about black squabbling leading to cops intervening. There's another story that I listened to today about a black women squabbling with each other, fighting each other, and then the cops show up and taser one of the black females while they hitting each other with bottles and slapping and all. And I'm not talking about children. I'm talking about grown adults. I mean, middle-aged people that have children of their own, fighting and squabbling like little kids. And then the white cops show up and get their rocks off, brutalizing who they see, who they know, they expect. I mean, this kind of behavior is expected. The white people, the way a ghetto is constructed, these are only type of people that are allowed to be created in the ghetto, with crappy education, no constructive things to be able to do. White people, and becoming a cop means that you're able to go into this place and do whatever you want to these people and get some laughs out of it, watching black people act foolish, acting like children. You know, and we see this ghetto-ness, we see this kind of behavior as being black. I don't, but so many of us do. You know, I grew up hearing people call me white for paying attention in class when I was a kid and speaking with appropriate grammar. You know, if you were a young black male in the 1990s with glasses and you're speaking with good grammar, you were either acting white or you were like Steve Urkel. You know, that's what young black males had to endure back then. You know, whereas 30 years earlier, you know, Minister Malcolm X spoke with pretty good grammar and nobody was calling him white. Let you know how much work white people had done on us over those past 30 years to get us to see that that's what, you know, black people, if you speak with terrible grammar, like you've never read a book in your life and never gone to school in your life, that's what being black is, you know. We take pride in coming from ghettos and slums and projects. I'm from the projects. People actually take pride in this garbage. You know, we see ourselves as trash and can't see outside of that trash. Taking pride in stupid things is a huge part of backwardness that is necessary for white supremacy to be maintained. You know, it's a product of people having no leadership. You know, that's why I always say, you know, our so-called leadership. Now, that's what I always say because we don't really have leadership, and I'll get back to that. You know, Amos Wilson in his Blueprint for Black Power, a book that I'm going to speak to on also in this post, he refers to ghettos as economic brothels. You know, there to give it up to anybody who wants it. You know, like any African nation you can think of. You know, there for the taking. You know, and I always saw ghettos as like breeding farms. You know, like slave breeding farms. You know, ghettos, you know, like any plantation. People in ghettos serve no function in the society other than to provide profits for white people. You know, they serve no purpose other than or to justify or to be used as justifications for white institutional violence. You know, people who are in ghettos pay absurd amounts of money in tickets and fines and warrants, or they pay by being incarcerated and providing slave labor, or they let their children go out of that ghetto into the world and become rappers or athletes and make white people even richer and bring none of that back to where they came from. Because in a ghetto, like any African nation, everything goes out, nothing comes in. Generation after generation of that, things just going to get worse and worse and worse. Relationships are going to get worse. You know, families are going to get worse. Education gets worse. Everything has gotten worse. Because everything goes out and nothing comes in. Ghettos may produce scientists or doctors every now and then, but those people always leave and they never come back. It's the only purpose ghettos serve in this society, black people in ghettos. And our so-called leadership has watched this get worse and worse for decades. That's what infuriates me most, is that we call people leaders. We put people up on pedestals. We call people civil rights heroes and icons when they allow our race to be in such an incredibly degraded state. You know, no black person who's lived for the past 60 years with the title of black leader deserves to be called heroic or iconic. You know, I've read so many articles over the past, week or so calling people like John Lewis civil rights icon and legend. And no offense to John Lewis, like so many of those people I read about in those black nationalism books, I'm sure he had good intentions. But good intentions is not good enough when people's lives are hanging in the balance. You know, I heard ridiculous articles calling somebody like Charles Evers, Medgar Evers' brother, a civil rights pioneer. I actually saw that in a hell. Pioneer? This is ridiculous as using the word reconciliation in reference to relationship between white people and black people. It's like these people expect you not to know what words mean. Pioneer? Pioneer means you founded something. You start and to suggest that Charles Evers, who accomplished nothing of any significance in his life, the idea that he's a civil rights pioneer is such an incredible insult to black people who fought white supremacy in the centuries that preceded him. But we're not expected to see things in historical context. We're expected to be living in the moment and be emotional and use hyperbole and give people praise who don't deserve praise. No one who calls themselves a leader of the black race right now deserves praise. Because I look at the conditions of the absolute most lowly, destitute black people as a gauge for how the race is doing. And no race is lower than we are when it comes to degradation and quality. Like the richest country in the world, and to listen to the testimonies of people I've listened to over the past couple of days in the richest country in the world, I mean, And when we want to behave like we actually are superior to black people on the African continent, the degradation of black people there is just as bad here. And this is the richest country in the world, and the people are just as degraded, just as uneducated, just as ignorant, just as childish, just as self-destructive. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you're black under white supremacy, the situation is the same. Our so-called leadership deserves to be put out to pasture, really. Actually, they deserve worse, but I'm not going any further with that, because I hate to see us in such a degraded state, and for us to see it as normal. Rats in the box of the white scientists. That's all ghettos are. Say, as Amos Wilson say, all ghettos are nigger boxes. And of course, in the news, you aren't seeing nobody writing about that, because our so-called leadership does not want to present that as a problem. They want you to disregard your own problems and obsess over changing other people that can't change, thus maintaining the status quo. And I'm tired of that. But let me get back to why originally I wanted to make this post. Okay. Black Lives Matter. Again. I've had a lot of thoughts, but not posted videos because I didn't want to repeat myself over the past couple of months. Like you can listen to anything that I posted, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, or written on Facebook. I'm not even on Facebook anymore because I found that to be increasingly pointless. I'm tired of repeating myself, and to people who don't listen and people who just nitpick every little thing. I've gotten fed up with trolls on Facebook. It is not the place to share information because no one really listens. They only troll or they parrot the words of other people. And I'm at this point I am pretty much done with Facebook, and I'm only interested in on YouTube. I probably won't even post many future videos unless I've read a new book that's giving me new information I have to get out of my system. I'm not going to be posting videos regarding, citing headlines that I've read that made me want to speak, because, I'm tired of this, and I'm tired of people not listening, and wasting my breath and repeating myself, and especially since 2014, nothing has changed. I started reading about racism in 2012. In 2014, after Michael Brown and Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and John Crawford and all of the people, all of this, quote-unquote black consciousness that occurred and all this Black Lives Matter stuff, and nothing happened. Nothing changed. And 6 years later, you see the same headlines these people are repeating over and over again. Statues needing to be taken down. We're still talking about taking down Confederate statues. White people are ignorant about racism. They need to be educated. We're still talking about this. Obsessed with the feelings of white people. We need police reform. Are we still talking about reforming the police? At this stage of the game, we're still talking about reforming the police. We need to support black businesses. This reactionary nationalism about needing to support black businesses that people weren't emphasizing before. And nobody asked the question, why is it that black people need to be urged to support black businesses when no other race needs to be urged to support themselves? You don't see any articles asking why that is. People like Ibram X. Kendi being branded as a racism expert, like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Cornel West and Henry Louis Gates. These people, books about, article after article about our allies, nonsense about us having allies, whether it's Jews or Asians or Hispanics and Indians. I actually see articles talking about the historical unity between black people and Jews, which is just so laughable. It's disgusting. More marching, more protests, more kneeling, more deflections, going on and on about Donald Trump as if he's the basis for white supremacy. The only thing that I like about the protests and stuff is that it does cause less refined white supremacists to expose themselves in droves on social media and in public outbursts, because they get irritated of their culture being spoken of so publicly, but apart from that, it accomplishes nothing. The protests and the march and all that. This does, protests and march and kneeling doesn't provide protection, and these people don't seem to understand that. And this isn't victim blaming. This is me evolving past mindless thinking and not being led by white liberals, actually having a mind of my own and seeing that something doesn't work. Why is it that we only care about black people when they're killed by white cops? People talking about if George Floyd hadn't been killed by, and if he hadn't been killed, no black person, none of these people would pay any attention. His name, he wouldn't have been nobody to them had he not been killed. We only want to make people into heroes after they're killed by law enforcement. We have this culture of wanting to make people into martyrs rather than valuing each other before then. We have to be killed, and then all of a sudden, that's our awakening after somebody is killed. Why does somebody have to be killed, particularly by white people, for us to wake up? It's a sick thing when you think about it. This is what arouses our attention. We don't care about mass incarceration. We don't care about our children not being educated. We don't care about all our money going out of our neighborhoods and nothing coming in. This culture of death, this culture of victimhood, I just find just nauseating, where no power is going to come from just embracing a historic role as victims of white supremacy. We want to build monuments to victims rather than preventing victims. I don't see a cultural shift. I see a lot of reactionary nationalism. I spoke about reactionary nationalism when I read those books about black nationalism in America, and the golden age of black nationalism, where they talked about how black people go wherever white people push us. If white liberals get a hold of us, we want to be integrationists. The white people are hostile towards us, we embrace nationalism. Except this is just reactionary nationalism. We haven't gone full on Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad. Those people, we don't see any. There are no public figures today, propping up black nationalism. You don't see any figures like that anymore. The assimilationists, the white liberals have completely co-opted black people to the point to where they won't allow a black person to stand up publicly embracing black nationalism and being exposed to a lot of other black people. You're not going to see that anymore. And that makes things even worse than they were before. I see no public figures acknowledging that we need to change in a way that benefits us. Black nationalists always focus on how we need to change. It's not victim blaming unless you mean we need to change to be accepted by white people. I see foolish articles talking about people need to learn black history, as if white people need to learn black history, as if police violence has something to do with white people being ignorant about our history, as if the cops that terrorized George Floyd need to. Had they known black history, they wouldn't have done it. Just total nonsense. Awful. I see article after article about anti-racism books selling through the roof, and seeing the lists that they give of books that people should read about racism, and the lists are always garbage. You don't see any African-centered writers anywhere on the list. They're clearly books approved by white liberals, and it epitomizes the Black Lives Matter movement to me, so-called movement. It's just another co-opted white liberal puppet, no different than the NAACP. The goal is not to empower black people and end white power. It's to maintain the status quo while pretending to want to empower black people with failing solutions. Just the prospect of all that talk about making Juneteenth a holiday is the same old tactic that was used in the past. I remember reading in James Brown's autobiography about him pestering Richard Nixon to make Dr. King's birthday a holiday to pacify black people during all those riots in the late 60s. And that epitomizes black bourgeois leadership. And when I say black bourgeois, I mean the same as so-called leadership. They're the same thing. No leadership at all. People who ceded leadership to another race, white people. Bourgeois leadership makes you think laws will save you. And they treat nationalism simply as a matter of protest. You're going to embrace nationalism, support black businesses in the hopes that white people would change, and then we'll go back to doing what we were doing before. The goal is to be part of the white empire and not to have our own empire. No talk of black businesses gaining a complete monopoly on black consumers. Rich black people have the money to provide institutions and services to the whole race. We have billions of dollars. not just in the rich black people in this society, but the combined wealth of black people in this country. We have billions of dollars. We have enough to provide for everybody. And the most prosperous of black people don't want to take money out of the pockets of rich white people that allow them to be rich. They might donate some money here or there, or maybe might have a business here or there, but these people should dominate the black consumer market completely. White people dominate the white consumer market. Asians dominate the Asian consumer market. Arabs dominate the Arab consumer market. But for some reason, black people don't dominate the black consumer market. Black people give all their money to other people. Even though we have all these rich black people, why aren't these rich black people providing everything that we need? We can have black hospitals if we wanted, so black people don't have to be suspicious about health care. But nobody asks, why is it that we have all these rich black people, and yet we don't have our own hospitals? Why is it that we don't have our own schools so black children can learn to operate in their own best interest and don't have to worry about teachers calling police on them? But nobody asks why is that. We just accept that we have to go to other people's schools and other people's hospitals. We can own our own movie studios and movie theaters and stop worrying about representation in film and television. We have the money for it. We can have all these things, but our so-called leadership doesn't want us to have these things. They want to keep us as dumb as white people want to keep us dumb. And they want to enjoy their individualistic, isolated existences far from the rest of the black population. They want us to have an inferiority complex. They want us to be alienated from our own bodies. I say every day, I think of like the Amos Wilson statement, the truest statement I have ever heard is that it's a political statement, is a political necessity for black people to be out of their minds. The truest statement I've ever heard, and how the world is maintained. We have to be crazy. Every other group knows that we have to be stupid. We have to work against our own interests. We have to not want power, and what we want is the love of other people. That is all that we want. I have no new thoughts about the protests and all that. So it's just more of the same. And at this point, I don't pay any attention to it. I'm just so desperately looking for black people that are actually serious, about solving the problem. And especially after reading Blueprint for Black Power, I'm not going to cite every single thing in the book. Because the book is so dense, it's over 850 pages. I could go on for hours citing all the stuff in that book that just riveted me. It's one of the best books I've ever read, and it is a practical book, and it doesn't overlap with Amos Wilson's other books. His other books, a lot of them are written about psychiatry, and whereas Blueprint for Black Power is all about practical things. It's not about psychology. It's about economics and politics and how power is exercised, how it has been in the past, and examples of how we can exercise it. The very last chapter of the book, which ended up being probably the best chapter was about what I've referred to previously as our so-called leadership. He heavily criticizes the leadership that we had in the last chapter. Leadership that's presided over decades of decline, mass homelessness, HIV, AIDS, gang violence, drug wars, decline in black businesses, horrible education, mass incarceration, hyper-segregation, ghettoization, increase in hostility between black men and women, sexual confusion in children, And yet we want to call people civil rights icons, legends, and pioneers. Just total insanity. And we're insane because white people want and need us to be insane. The early chapters of Blueprint for Black Power were all about how power is exercised in different ways. Economically, persuasion. All the ways that people exercise power when dealing with other people. And eventually he gets over to economics, and he gets into the depths of economics regarding economics regarding religion, economics regarding education, politics, the military, immigration policies, how economics are affected in all those things, and how other races exploit us economically. How black people in America in reality parallel black people in Africa in terms of being colonized people. Even black people in America you don't think of as being colonized. We are colonized people. Neo-colonial leadership black bourgeois so-called leadership, it's all the same thing. People that of leadership that is, under the thumb of another group. And all the money goes out and nothing comes in, and every other group functions as a nation except us. Amos Wilson, he talks about how he compares the Nation of Islam and how they functioned under Elijah Muhammad to the black Christian church, and how the Nation of Islam used religion as a base for nationhood and generating money and acquiring land and building institutions. And he acknowledges the failures of the black Christian church, but also acknowledges the possibilities of the black Christian church financially, about how the black Christian church actually is, in the past, has generated money, and how they have the potential to be an economic base for black people if they wanted to. He writes about how a group that is economically disorganized is powerless politically, and how we're used politically by Democrats and Republicans. Wilson suggests that we should have our own political party. Because if we had our own party, would mean that we have our own goals and our own values, And he really highlights the foolishness of black people who call themselves Democrats or Republicans. Parties that have never represented our interests and are ultimately anti-African. Amos Wilson, he refers to so many other books in this book. He cites so many, hundreds of books, and all of them I want to read. And it will take a long time for me to get to him, but I will get to him eventually. He cites so many, like a lot of the greats, when they're giving you information or citing other authors. Some authors, he's referring to some African writers and some white writers, because he was talking about power, and white people write a lot of books about power, and they just expect us not to read them. Books that have a lot of truth in them about how power is exercised in the world, and you get the impression reading this book that Amos Wilson read so much. He read so many books and everything, and the book is full of a lot of excerpts from other books, and very important excerpts. The book, it serves so many purposes. I mean, this book destroys the myth of black people being not being good entrepreneurs, because Wilson cites so many examples of black entrepreneurs in the past, and the way white people have always sought to dismantle black economic development, even making laws to ensure that to stunt black economic development, and how so many black people prospered even under the most harsh circumstances. He mentions the tremendous rebuilding effort that occurred after the Tulsa, Oklahoma white terror attack, something that people never talk about. That's the first time I read about it. He talked about how black people rebuilt after that, and the emphasizing our resilience and as well as our economic fortitude. He acknowledges the reactionary nationalism of the past, like after the racist cops got off for assaulting Rodney King, and there was all this talk of supporting black businesses and boycotting and all that, just like the talk now. So we treat it like it's a cultural thing for us to just wait for racist cops to strike and then beg white people to change their ways through protests. Nationalism should be a cultural trait. It shouldn't be a matter of protest. Blueprint for Black Power to me is a must-read, practical book intended for use in solving problems in a very real way. No abstractions, no wordplay, no emotions, just real information designed to help people that are serious. Clearly a book written by a man who wanted to solve a problem and was not joking around. I absolutely love the book, and I could not recommend it higher. The book I read right after I finished Blueprint for Black Power was They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South. It was a nice book to read, written. I didn't know till like halfway through I read it, while I was reading it, that it had a black female author. And it's nice to read something written by a black woman that didn't come across like she was manipulated by white feminists, because you would think a book written about this topic that it would be, in some way she would be going on and on about patriarchy or demonizing black men, but there's none of that in that book. In that book, she is focused on white women. It's all about white women. The book is definitely a shot to the likes of Margaret Atwood and that terrible Handmaid's Tale garbage, a persecution fantasy for white women. because that was a reality for black females, and white women were a part of that. So, you know, because the book is all about how white women, how they affected the slave market, how they held slave auctions in their own homes, making it more of a domestic thing. How frequently white women inherited slaves, and even in marriages with men, sometimes they were the ones who owned slaves, and the men didn't. And the man only got, and he only gained ownership in marrying this woman. And how they tried to maintain their slaves during the war and after the Civil War. Obviously the author doesn't, suggest that white women were in charge. That would be absurd, of course. White men were in charge and are in charge. She just wanted to drive home the point that white women were not bystanders. I mean, the last line of the book is they were co-conspirators, not just sitting by, didn't know what was happening. And the thing about the book that most, the thing that the book drove home most important to me was that it is impossible for white people to be ignorant about racism. Their culture is so insular, they all know the deal. White people always shut themselves off and don't live around other races. They don't live anywhere near other races. They're always around each other. So how could any white person be ignorant about white culture? I mean, it's it goes against all logic. Because white people always have to convince themselves that they are a majority. So they always have to, if they start an organization, they make sure that the majority of people in that organization that they started are white. Or they live in a neighborhood, or majority of people in that neighborhood have to be white, because they have to convince themselves that they're a majority, even though they all know they're a minority in the world. Psychologically, they have to convince themselves a majority. So how can they be ignorant when it's always a majority of them around? It's completely absurd, and yet I still have to read article after article about white people being ignorant about racism. That's one of the first myths you have to break through to understand racism, is that white people are not ignorant about racism. Black people are the ones who are ignorant. And continuously suggesting that white people are ignorant ones is a deliberate effort to keep us ignorant. But that book is very direct. And it seldom does it go off course and lose focus. More towards the very end of it, a little bit where it lost focus. But I read it pretty quickly because it was a very engrossing read that drove home the fact that white women are not, in the system of white supremacy, white women are a big part of it, and nobody in white culture is ignorant about how things operated and operate today. No innocence. And I also recommend that book greatly. Yeah. I'm currently reading The Scramble for Africa, written by Thomas Packham. I'm about a few hundred pages into the book that's about 600 pages, and I wouldn't say that it's a really engaging read, but it does give you great insight into the white mind, because it's written in a very Eurocentric way, and it's pretty much, it epitomizes how of Eurocentric writing of history, the type of writing present in Eurocentric education, the kind that black and white people get. It's basically the destruction of black civilization, but from a European point of view. Europeans are written about in a very humane, sympathetic way. They are seldom written about as being bad people in any way. Africans are seldom referred to at all, only referred to as corrupt or savages or barbaric or cannibals. African chiefs are constantly written of as wanting to be a part of the white empire. Those ones who didn't fight and need to be locked away, or referred to as all wanting to just, signing away their land in a display of brotherhood and solidarity and wanting to be part of the British Empire. So, And the book is all about how white people need to have a monopoly on resources. Killing Africans to gain that monopoly is, if they don't want to be a part of the empire, that's, the book just sort of glosses over them killing Africans who didn't want to give up anything to Europeans. The part that I read so far have been about the British and the French and the Portuguese and now the Germans. And it's important to know how Africa came to be in the state it currently is in. You know, what Europeans mean when they talk about Africa being wanting to civilize Africa. And it's important for us to know that Africa is not in its natural state. We like to distance ourselves from Africa because we believe anything white people say about it. You know, the refusal to look deeply into what happened in Africa is why we never solve problems. You know, we always start. We want to solve a problem. You got to start with the source. You know, and the source of the problem didn't start here. It started in Africa. Well, how we dealt with them. And Chancellor Williams wrote a whole book about it. And the whole lesson of the book was black people making one mistake after another in dealing with other races. Wanting to be brothers and friends with other people and destroying yourselves so other people can prosper. The destruction of Africa is the destruction of African people everywhere. This is why Europeans and Asians will do anything to maintain what they have in their countries. They won't let Europe be destroyed. They won't let Asia be destroyed because they need that. Even if Asians in this country or Europeans in this country know that those nations need to be maintained. Powerful nations make powerful individuals. You know, Africa must be brought back for black people to have power anywhere in the world. Marcus Garvey knew that. You know, doesn't mean that we all have to move back to Africa, but Africa must be run by African-centered Africans without European and Asian puppeteers. Groups will be hesitant to terrorize black people if we had the power to reward and punish based on a possession of resources, land, and military hardware. If a group does not have, anything to threaten you with, then you would never hesitate to brutalize them. Even if it's on camera. Don't have, if you know that all they're going to do is march and kneel afterwards, why would you be scared to kill them? It's not difficult to understand. The scramble for Africa. The book is all about parasites. Europeans, parasites, people who just suck the lifeblood everywhere they go in the world. And of course, I've read other books about what they did in Asia and what they did in South America, what they did everywhere they went. Or the Americas. Let's say the way that book is written, you could easily, that book could be transposed to America, and you could be talking about Native Americans the way African people are talking about in that book. It's the same thing. It's not that I care about what Europeans did in those other countries, but it's important to see the parallels about how they just did the same thing everywhere they went. But this is a history that we all need to know if we actually want to solve the problem. You got to know the basis for it and have a foundational understanding, and you will not. Anytime you see, any images of the state of Africa today, you would just be infuriated because you would know that is how it came to be, rather than see it as normal. To see African people degraded, starving, disease everywhere, no resources, and you won't see that as normal. I don't see it as normal. I don't see African people living in a degraded, inhuman state as normal. And that puts me in the minority. But I don't have a problem with that. The last thing I want to talk about is Neely Fuller Jr. addicts. Part of the reason why I've become so disenchanted with social media, with Facebook, why, as I've said before, when I first started studying racism, I read, the interracial con game, and people like Neely Fuller and Dr. Welsing were referenced in the book, and the cows was referenced, and I started listening to the context of white supremacy around 2012, maybe 2013. I started listening regularly, and I got a lot of constructive information, for years listening to it. But a couple of years ago, I stopped listening to it regularly. I wasn't listening, on a weekly basis to what shows. I stopped. I sort of grew. I wasn't hearing things that I felt were constructive to me. And now I don't listen to it at all. I don't listen to the cows at all. On social media, I've become so fed up with people who just parrot what they hear Gus T. Renegade say or what they've heard Neely Fuller Jr. say. People who just repeat phrases and terms ad nauseum. People who nitpick every word you use and go on and on about words and definition endlessly as if they alone are the solution to the problem. At a certain point, I stopped caring about why white people do what they do. I read Urugu, I read the ISIS papers, great books, but early reads for me in my studying from racism. Those are books I read very early. I care now more about what we need to do. That's why Blueprint for Black Power was such a great book. Neely Fuller Jr. and Dr. Frances Cress Welsing were great starts. They were great foundations for somebody studying racism. But others I've read surpass them in what they've written and get closer to the truth about what we need to do. There's always something subconscious when you don't do things. Like even early on, I never got around to reading Neely Fuller's books. Not that I didn't want to. I eventually will. I think because I just moved on to more African-centered writers who never got around, and I just never got around to reading his book. I will eventually. It's like I've never read any of Elijah Muhammad's books either. I will eventually. That's why I read his autobiography to help gain greater sympathy for him before I set to read books that he'd written. Like Neely Fuller Jr. is not a historian. He's not a psychiatrist. By his own admission, he's not even brave. He's not willing to put himself in harm's way. He talks, and a lot of the people, and sometimes he talks in abstractions. He talks about logic, but then sometimes he talks in abstractions. His words, he writes. He might have his own word guide, but his words are not the word of God. Or his words, the words designed to empower African people, or they just words locked up in their own idea of logic. He can have his words and his definitions. Our words and definitions should be used to help our race. That's what Elijah Muhammad understood. He was about a culture for us and using things to benefit us, not logic alone. People who obsess over Neely Fuller Jr. as though he is the authority on racism are more talkers than anything else. They aren't. From him, you aren't going to learn the difference between Africans and Europeans. People who obsess over Neely Fuller Jr. never seem to evolve in their thinking. People listen to the cows; they just wall themselves off in what they see as logic, and don't really grow in their thinking. Replacing racism with a system of justice sounded good, when I was more ignorant about racism. Now it sounds foolish to me. It's just talking in abstractions without logic. I'm done arguing with people about abstractions. I'm tired of talking. I don't like talking about racism. It's like Amos Wilson didn't like lecturing. It's not for fun. He didn't lecture for fun. He didn't enjoy. He would prefer not to talk about racism at all. He wanted to solve problems, and he felt it was the best way to speak to large numbers of people and get them interested in what he was doing. He was serious about solving the problems. He started his own business because he wanted to make it clear that he wasn't just a talker. So many people who talk about racism seem to just see it as a black cultural trait. This goes for the people who call themselves anti-racist or people who listen to the cows. Our so-called leadership wants us to see talking about racism as a cultural trait, because they know talk between races will not solve problems. It seems to be a form of recreation for some people to just gather and talk about racism. The culture should be about building power, not debating words and definitions endlessly. Marcus Garvey and Elijah Muhammad accomplished a lot without nitpicking. They promoted a pro-African culture of power accumulation. The figures we should most prop up are figures that accomplish things. People who present real solutions. Producing justice is not a solution. It's just talking and producing justice. What is justice? Anybody can have 1,000 different definitions for justice. That's not protection. That's not going to protect you from annihilation. A list of don'ts is not a solution, and that's what Dr. Welsing called it. Don't do this, don't do that. That's not a solution. I totally said Dr. Welsing's whole genetic annihilation philosophy. I completely agree with, and is one of the bases for why I don't see any future between black people and white people that doesn't involve annihilation. Because they do what they do to survive as a race, and there's nothing you can say to talk them out of it. And therefore, my mind is already set in stone when it comes to dealing with white people. But a list of don'ts is not going to solve that problem. And this is not a shot at Neely Fuller Jr. or Dr. Welsing. Like I said, that they are great starts and great foundations for people studying racism. But at a certain point, you need to lock in the people that actually presented real solutions to solving problems. I'm just more interested in solving problems than ever before. I don't want to post these videos. It's more therapy for me to get these thoughts out of my head. But I don't enjoy it. I want us to stop destroying ourselves. I want us to stop helping the enemy. I want us to put our survival as a race over everything else. Because we can't survive on the course that we're on. Where are the black nationalist figures these days providing a solution to white supremacy, a real one? We have no interest in controlling our own destiny. We act like defeated people. My mind hasn't given up. I'm just not content with just talking about racism anymore. The problem will not be solved through talking, despite the idiotic news articles suggesting that this is the case. The problem will be stopped when black people worldwide stop hating themselves and grow up. Stop wanting to be children. I say words and definitions are important. Elijah Muhammad knew the importance of names. Neely Fuller wrote about. Amos Wilson wrote about how a group having the ability to define is important to that group's survival. You can't let other groups define things. But that's about us being in control of definition, not that the definition simply be logical. It's about us being in control of it. It's important that our definitions operate in our interests. I'm done with talking about justice. Justice will not protect us. Power will do that. I only care about I don't care about the survival of other races. I only care about African people. And African people are enemies to all other races. It might seem overwhelming, but if you respect and love your race now and what has been here before us, then you do it anyway. Reading about my ancestors caused me to fall in love with them. And when you don't read that history, you don't judge your actions in the appropriate context. Every action I take, I view in the context of what I've read. Like after reading Blueprint for Black Power, where Amos Wilson wrote about how white-owned banks, rob the black community and how we give them our money and they give us nothing in return. I closed my bank account with U.S. Bank and opened an account with One United Bank, America's largest black-owned bank. And that was just a minor thing. I look all the time for African-centered institutions and figures that are trying to do things, and I haven't found much. Our so-called leadership makes me so rageful because they're about destroying our minds so that white people can control our bodies. They just keep us crazy and keep us programmed, and it's just running in a circle. So we accomplish nothing. And if I post any future videos, they probably will be just about books that I've read, because I'm tired of saying the same thing over and over again. There's not much more I can say. Now is the time for doing. I'm tired of talking about why white people do this, why white people do this. I'm interested in real solutions, things that we have the power to do. And true African-centered writers always reinforce that we have the power to solve the problem. It's just a matter of we get our minds right and feel enough responsibility to our ancestors to actually solve the problem and stop wanting the love of other people. I'm done for now. Thanks for listening.